Chapter 14 of The Harbor. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tom Weiss. The Harbor by Ernest Poole. Chapter 14. The great voice of the crowd, incessant, demanding of me and of all within hearing to throw in our lives, to join in this march to a new free world, regardless of all risk to ourselves, grew clear to me now. I felt myself drawn in with the rest. I was helping in the publicity work. Each day I met with the leaders to draw up statements for the press. And these messages to the outside world that I wrote to the slow and labored dictation of some burly docker comrade, or again by myself at dawn to express the will of a meeting that had lasted half the night, slowly became for me my own. Almost unawares I had taken the habit of asking, how much can we do? How sane and vigilant can we be to keep clear of violence, bloodshed, mobs, and a return to chaos? How long can we hold together fast? How far can we march toward this promised land? In order to see ourselves as a whole and feel our swiftly swelling strength, having now burst the confines of our hall, we began to hold meetings out on the farm. There are many farms on the waterfront, for a farm is simply the open shore space in front of a dock. But this, which was one of the widest of all, now came to be spoken of as the farm, and took on an atmosphere all its own. For there were scenes here which will long endure in the memories of thousands of people. For them it will be a great bright spot in the times gone by, in one of those times behind the times, as this strange world keeps rushing on. From the top of a pile of sand where I stood with the speakers at the end of a soft April day, I saw the whole farm massed solid with people. This mass rose in hummocks and hills of humanity over the piles of brick and sand and of crates and barrels dumped by the trucks, and out over the water they covered the barges and the tugs, and there were even hundreds upon the roofs of dock sheds. The yelp of a dog was heard now and then, and the faint cries of children. But the mass as a whole stood motionless, without a sound. They had stood thus since 2 o'clock, and now the sun was setting. To the west the harbor was empty. No smoke from ships obscured the sun, and it shone with radiant clearness upon 11 races of men, upon Italians, Germans, French, on English, Poles and Russians, on Negroes and Norwegians, Lascars, Malays, coolies, on figures burly, figures puny, faces white and faces swarthy, yellow, brown, and black. The sun shone upon all alike, except where that Morgan liner, still lying unloaded at her dock, threw a long, dark, creeping shadow out across the throng. 30,000 people were here, 30,000 intensely alive. As I eagerly watched their faces, it was not their poverty now, but their boundless fresh vitality that took hold of me so hard. I had read many radical books of late, in my groping for a foothold, and I had found most of them dry affairs. But now the crowd, through its leaders, had laid hold upon the thoughts in these books, had made them its own, and so given them life. In the process the thoughts had been twisted and bent, some parts ignored, and others brought out of all their nice proportions. Exaggeration, sentiment, all kinds of crudity were here. But it was crudity alive. A creed was here in action. Out of all the turmoil, the take and give, the jar and clash back there in the meeting hall, had come certain thoughts and passions, hopes and plans, that the multitude had not ignored or hooted, but had caught up and cheered into life. And these ideas that they had cheered were now being pounded back into their minds. Monotonous repetition, you say? Yes, monotonous repetition, slow sledge-hammer blows upon something red-hot, pounding, 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 that when it cooled its shape might be changed. Nora Ganey was speaking. "Look at those ocean liners," she cried. Her voice was sharp and strident. "They're paralyzed now. And because they are, they're costing the big companies millions of dollars every day. That's what their time is worth to their owners. But what are those ships worth to you? $10 a week and a broken arm? Or a leg or a skull? You can take your choice. 6,000 of you men were crippled and crushed to death last year. And that, let me remind you, was only in the port of New York. Why was it? Why did it have to be? And why will it always have to be until you make these ships your own? Because, fellow workers, the time of the ships is worth so much to their owners that the work has got to be rushed day and night. And in that rush, somebody's bound to get hurt. If he isn't killed, he's lucky. And as for the rest, when at last you're through and dead tired, they point to the saloons and say, 'Now have a few drinks. We won't need you again till next Tuesday.' Do you know what all this means in your homes? It means drunks, cripples, sick and poor. It means such sights as I'll never forget. I've seen 'em all, just lately. I never thought of such things before. I liked my office job on the dock, and all the jobs around me, and when sailing time drew near, I liked the last excitement. I liked the rich furs and dresses and the cute little earrings and slippers and dogs that were attached to the women who came. I liked to see them pile out of their motors and laugh and make eyes at the men they belonged to. I liked to peep into the cabins they had, get on to all the luxuries there. But out of all this magnificence, friends, and this work that keeps it going, I saw one day a man come on a stretcher. He was dead. And that started me thinking. That's why I came out when the strike was called. And in the strike I've gone into your homes. I've seen what those soft, expensive female dolls and all the work that makes them costs. And I've got a thrill of another kind. It's a thrill that'll last for the rest of my life. And in yours too, fellow workers, for I believe that you'll go right on, that you'll strike and strike and strike again, till you make these tenements own these ships, and a life won't be thrown away for $1. She stopped sharply and stepped back, and there burst out a frenzy of applause, which died down to be caught up and prolonged and deepened into a steady roar as Marsh came slowly forward. He stood there bareheaded, impassive and quiet, listening to the great voice of the mass. At last he turned to the chairman. The latter picked up a whistle, and at that piercing call to order slowly the cheering began to subside. Faces pressed eagerly closer. Marsh looked all around him. "Fellow workers," he began, "it's hard for a man to be understood when he's talking to men from all over the world." He pointed down to a cluster of Lascars with white turbans on their heads. "You don't understand me. But some of your comrades will give you my speech, for we are all strike brothers here. On the ship there is no flag. On the ship there is no nation. On the ship there is only work. On the ship there are only the workers. For a ship may be equipped with the most powerful engines to drive her. She may have the best brains to direct her course. But the ship can't sail until you go aboard. You're the men who make the ships of use. You're the men who give value to the stock of all the big ship companies. You are the ship industry. And to you the ship industry should belong. I want you now to think of a tombstone. Out in the Atlantic, 2 miles down, they tell me, a big ship is stuck with her bow in the ooze of the ocean floor and her stern 600 feet up in the water. In the cold green light down there she looks like a tombstone, and she is packed with dead people inside. She is there because where she should have had lifeboats, she had French cafes instead, and sun parlors for the ladies. Some of these ladies went down with the ship, and we heard a lot about their screams, but we haven't heard much of the cries for help of the thousands of men who go down every year in rotten old ships upon the seas. Nor have we heard of the millions more who are killed on land, on the railroads, in the mines and mills and stinking slums of cities. But now we've decided that cries like these are to be heard all over the world. For we've only got one life apiece, we're not quite sure of another. And because we do all the work that is done, we want all the life there is to be had. All the life there is to be had. That's what we are striking for. That is our share of the life in this world. And until we get our share, this labor war will have no end. Other wars may come and go, but under them all, on land and sea, this war of ours will go steadily on, will swallow up all other wars, will swallow up in all your minds all hatred of your brother men. For you, they will be workers all. With them you will rise, and the world will be free. When the long stormy din of cheers had little by little died away, Joe Kramer began the last speech of the day. He had eaten and slept little, he had lived on coffee and cigarettes, and there was a strained look in his deep eyes as he rose up, lean and gaunt, by my side. "I'm here today to speak to the men who work in stokeholes naked," he said. "I'm here to talk of the lives you lead, and the lives that millions before you have led, for a few brief years, and then they have died. For lives in stokeholes are not long. And before I begin, I propose that we stand for a moment with uncovered heads." He looked out over the multitude as though seeing far beyond them, and his voice was as harsh as the look in his eyes. "As a tribute to all the dead stokers," he said. And in a breathless silence the multitude did what he had asked. Joe broke this silence sharply. "Now, for life and the living," he said, "why was it that those men all died? What has the change from sails to steam done to the lives of the men at sea? The old sailor at least had air to breathe. But what you breathe is red-hot gas. I know, because I've been there. There is a gong upon the wall, and when it clangs you heave in coal. And if when it clangs faster you don't quite keep up to its pace, a white light flashes out of the wall. And that light is the chief engineer's way of saying, 'God damn you, keep up those fires down there. Time is money. Who are you?' The old-time sailor lived on deck. He had the winds, the sun, and the stars. But you live down between steel walls, with only the glare of electric lights in which you sleep and eat and sweat. You work at all kinds of irregular hours. For you there is no day or night. You don't know whether the millionaire and his last and loveliest wife are drinking champagne before going to bed in their cabin de luxe above you, or taking their coffee the next day at noon. You don't know about anything way up there, unless you go up as I've seen you do, half out of your senses from the heat, and make a sudden jump for the rail. The cry is heard, 'Man overboard!' then shrieks and a chorus of 'Oh my gods!' And then somebody says, 'It's only a stoker.'" He stopped short, and at that sudden roar of the crowd I saw him frown and quiver. He drew a deep, slow breath, and went on. "They threw off all the good in the ship with sails, but they carefully kept all that was bad. The old mutiny laws, they kept all that. Undermanning of crews, they kept all that. The waterfront sharks, they kept all that. But there was one thing they couldn't keep, the old sailor's habit of standing all this. He had run away to sea as a boy. He'd been kicked all his life by the bucko mate into a state where he couldn't kick back. But with you men it is not so. Among all the thousands standing here, most were on shore a few years ago, and you took your land views with you on board. You organized seamen's unions. The one in this country was meek and mild. It did not strike, it went on its knees to Congress instead. And here's part of the written petition it made. We raise our manacled hands in humble supplication, and we pray that the nations of the earth issue a decree for our emancipation, restore us our rights as brother men. But Congress had no ear for you then. Sailors are men who have no votes. And so you failed in your pleading. But in the labor movement there seems to be no such word as fail. You have not given up your union. Instead, you have formed one of a kind more dangerous to your masters. You have not made smaller your requests. No, you are now demanding more. And instead of asking for merciful laws, you are saying, "We are done with your laws. We'll have none of your laws. We'll break your laws when they come in our way." And what do your masters answer? Here are thousands of deserters. Every man here has broken the law by leaving his ship. But have they tried to arrest you? No. They're afraid to arrest 20,000 men. They're afraid of this strike. They're afraid of you. They're so almighty scared downtown that though we've been only a week on strike, they've already sent their commands to their Congress to give us what merciful laws we like. They're scared because we've thrown over their laws, because they know that we now see our power to stop all their ships and the trade of their land and send their stock market into a panic. And now, do you know what I want you to do? I want you to look at their ships, at their docks, at their harbor, men, and laugh. Laugh! Don't you see there's no need of violence? Laugh! In old times the people built barricades. You don't need barricades nor any guns. All you've got to do is stand here and laugh. Look at all you have done to your bosses, and laugh. To this town, to this nation, and laugh, laugh. Look and think of what you can do, all you, and you, and you, and you, just by folding your arms. Think of all you will do, and laugh, 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 laugh. He broke off with both arms raised, and there followed one moment without a sound. Then suddenly, quick and hard and clear, from a corner of this human ocean, I heard a single peal of laughter. In an instant scores joined in. Rising in outbursts here and there, deepening, rushing out over the farm, it gathered and rolled in wave on wave, rising, always rising, and it swelled into such a laugh that I saw the police feel for their clubs. Reporters scrambled for high places, turned their kodaks on it all. Women snatched up their babies in terror and ran. Marsh stepped forward, caught Joe by the arm, and jerked him back to where I was standing. I gripped Joe's hand. It was icy cold. Marsh shouted to the chairman, and the piercing whistle for order was heard. But it took a long time for that laugh to die. Long after the meeting had broken up, I saw groups gather together, and presently they would begin to laugh, and their laughter would take on again that same convulsive tensity. I heard small clusters laughing, and dense throngs in hot saloons where the low rooms would echo and double the roar. Late at night, out on the waterfront under the bow of that Morgan ship, I found two strikers smoking their pipes, and I sat down and lighted mine. One was a Lascar, the other a Pole. In the strike these wanderers over the earth had met on the waterfront under a wagon, where each had come to sleep the night. Since then they had become good friends. Each spoke a little English. Each one had caught bits here and there from the speeches made that afternoon, and they had been trying to pool what they'd heard, trying to find why it was they had laughed. As now I tried to give them the gist of what Joe Kramer had said, from time to time they would glance up at the big ship they had paralyzed and chuckle softly to themselves. Then I went on to Marsh's speech, and out there in the darkness I could feel their rough faces, one white and one brown, grow deeply, eagerly intent, as these strike brothers listened to the voice that had spoken the dream of the crowd. Other wars may come and go, but under them all on land and sea this war of ours will go steadily on, will swallow up all other wars, will swallow up in all your minds all hatred of your brother men. For you they will be workers all. With them you will rise, and the world will be free. End of chapter 14. Recording by Tom Weiss.